Spring 1974, 5 miles north of the Yukon River. A small plane sets down on frozen ground and drops off Dave Horgen at a construction camp that does not yet have a road connecting it to anything. His job is to oversee the building of a highway that will run 358 miles north to Prudhoe Bay, a road that, as of this morning, exists only as a survey line on a map, because no road has ever crossed this ground before. Somewhere south of him, freight is already staging at Fairbanks, pipe sections 4 feet across, pump station modules, food, fuel, the first pieces of what will eventually total 3 million tons. None of it can move north until Horgen's crews put a road under it. He has, by the schedule Alyeska has set, a matter of months. What he does not yet know is that a bulldozer worth a couple $100,000 is about to catch fire on his watch. In his first week or two on the job, a small, ordinary catastrophe that tells him exactly how little margin this project has for anything going wrong. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of heavy haul trucking in America between 1945 and 1995, what a specific transformer, bridge girder, or oil field haul actually required, what the engineers, drivers, and escort crews had to calculate and execute, and what those loads actually became once delivered. Not spectacle about big trucks, the documented technical reality of a high-stakes logistics trade. What this trade gives you, whether or not anyone in your family drove it, is a specific answer to a question most people never think to ask. How did anything this heavy ever actually get there? And if someone in your family worked on the pipeline, drove the whole road, or built roads across Arctic ground, put it in the comments. What do you remember them saying about it? There is more of this Arctic supply chain still to come, including what happened at the Yukon River itself before the bridge was finished. Back to the road. What Horgen's crews built was not simply a road. It was a gravel embankment engineered to sit on top of permafrost without melting it, because the moment frozen ground under a road surface begins to thaw, the road stops being solid ground and starts being a swamp. The corridor was 358 miles long, from the Yukon River to Prudhoe Bay, and Alyeska had budgeted roughly $125 million and set a timeline that gave the crews one short Arctic summer to finish it before winter made construction impossible again. They finished it in 154 days, a road built in 5 months across ground that had never carried a wheel before. Using 3 million hours of labor, it was restricted, once open, to commercial traffic only, a closed industrial corridor built for one purpose, to move Alyeska's freight north, not a public highway. Once the road opened, it did not stay empty. Pipeline truck driver Dave Smallwood, describing what the whole road actually looked like during construction, put it in 4 words: it was bumper-to-bumper traffic. That description is worth sitting with, because it contradicts the image most people carry of Arctic trucking, a single truck, alone, against an empty white landscape. The reality, at the peak of construction, was closer to a highway-scale supply operation compressed onto one narrow gravel road. 3 million tons of freight over the life of the project, all of it funneled through 358 miles of road that had not existed a year earlier. Every pipe section, every pump station module, every load of fuel and food for 31 construction camps and up to 28,000 workers had to move on this one corridor, in both directions. Without the redundancy an ordinary supply chain would have. What made that possible was not just the road. It was a specific kind of driver, doing a specific kind of work, for a specific kind of money, because Alyeska's Teamster contract on the whole road guaranteed 18-hour days, and drivers working 9 or 10 months of the year on those hours could earn 7,000 to 10,000 a month. Extraordinary pay in 1974, for a reason. The job was extraordinary in what it demanded back. The whole road solved the problem of 358 miles of tundra. It did not, at first, solve the problem of the Yukon River itself. For most of the construction period, freight moving north had to cross a river nearly half a mile wide with no permanent bridge. In place, the permanent span would not open until October 1975, more than a year after the whole road itself was finished. In the meantime, Alyeska leaned on a hoverbarge and helicopter fuel hauling to get material across, and seriously weighed building a temporary ice bridge for the coldest months, before the ground was frozen enough to make that option workable. The permanent crossing being built to replace all of that, what would become the E.L. Patton Yukon River Bridge, was itself a $31 million undertaking by a construction consortium racing its own schedule. A span designed to rise some 200 feet above the river on piers anchored to bedrock. Partway through construction, engineers discovered unstable ground conditions at one of the river's piers, forcing a redesigned footing and a failed cofferdam that had to be pulled and rebuilt. A documented, costly complication in the middle of a project that was already being built against the clock of an Arctic construction season, with a hard winter shutdown on one end and Alyeska's own freight schedule pressing from the other. When the bridge opened on October 10, 1975, 2 months ahead of the revised schedule, despite the pier footing delay, it did something the barge and the helicopter never could. It removed the seasonal bottleneck at the river entirely. Before the bridge, freight volume north depended in part on whether the Yukon was open water, frozen solid enough for an ice crossing, or in the unpredictable transitional state where neither barge nor ice bridge was reliable, a river that twice a year could simply stop being crossable by any conventional means. After the bridge, a truck loaded with 48-inch pipe sections at Fairbanks could, in principle, run the full 358 miles to Prudhoe Bay without the operation ever depending on the condition of the river beneath it. That is what a single fixed structure did for an entire supply chain. It converted a seasonal, weather-dependent choke point into a year-round crossing, and it let Alyeska treat the whole road, for the first time since construction began, as one continuous corridor rather than two separate logistics problems joined by an improvisation. To understand why the whole road worked the way it did, you need to understand what kind of road it actually was. This was not a public highway that trucking companies happened to use. From the day it opened in 1974 until the state began opening sections to the public in 1981, the whole road was a closed, permitted corridor run by Alyeska for one purpose: moving the freight and personnel of an $8 billion construction project. That distinction mattered enormously. A public highway has to accommodate everyone: passenger cars, local traffic, unpredictable use. A closed industrial corridor can be scheduled, controlled, and dedicated entirely to the freight it exists to move, which is part of why a road built in 154 days could carry 3 million tons of material without collapsing under demand it was never designed for. The road's full length was not even open to the public all at once. Afterward, access reached Disaster Creek in 1981, and it took until 1994, 17 years after the pipeline itself was finished, for the state to open the corridor all the way to Deadhorse for ordinary travelers. For most of the era this video documents, this was never a road built for the public. It was industrial infrastructure built to move freight on a schedule set by one company's construction deadline. It is worth stepping back to what this specific supply chain actually made possible. The whole road and its trucks were not the point. They were the delivery mechanism for an 800-mile pipeline system that would eventually move North Slope crude, America's largest domestic oil discovery, to the ice-free port of Valdez, a total construction cost of roughly $8 billion, employing up to 28,000 people at the project's peak. Every pipe section that reached Prudhoe Bay on a flatbed had first been staged at Fairbanks, then hauled the full length of a road that had not existed the year before, across a river that for over a year had no fixed crossing at all. None of the 800 miles of pipeline, none of the pump stations, none of the camps housing tens of thousands of workers could have been supplied without this specific, narrow, closed corridor functioning correctly, continuously, in conditions that shut down ordinary trucking everywhere else in the country. The pipeline that resulted has since moved more than 18 billion barrels of crude. That number starts, in a very literal sense, with a plane dropping a road engineer on frozen ground north of the Yukon River, and a schedule that gave him 154 days to build the foundation everything else depended on. If this channel is going to keep documenting what it actually took to move America's heaviest industrial loads before digital systems took over part of the job, subscribe. There are more transformer hauls, more bridge crossings, more supply corridors built from nothing under an impossible deadline, and more of the specific people who built and drove them, who were rarely described as remarkable at the time because they didn't have time to think of it that way. Whether or not anyone in your family drove this specific road, what this operation shows is a genuinely rare thing. An entire industrial supply chain, road, bridge, trucks, and drivers built and running inside 18 months, because a nation's energy strategy needed it to. And if you have a connection, a relative who worked on the pipeline, drove the whole road, or built infrastructure across difficult terrain, put it in the comments. What do you know about what that work actually demanded of them? There's more of this Arctic construction story still to tell, including what the road itself became once its industrial purpose ended. Dave Horgen's whole road opened to commercial traffic on September 29, 1974, 154 days after the plane first dropped him on frozen ground north of the Yukon. By 1981, the state had begun opening sections to public travel. By 1994, 17 years after the last pipeline weld was completed, the entire corridor, now called the Dalton Highway, was open to ordinary drivers from one end to the other. What the finished road and bridge gave the region: a permanent, year-round route north that had never existed before, one that outlived the construction project it was built to serve. What it did not erase was what building it in 154 days had actually required: 3 million labor hours, a supply chain run without the redundancy any ordinary highway takes for granted, and a specific kind of driver willing to work 18-hour days on a road that same spring, had been nothing but a survey line on a map. Dave Horgen did not know, watching a bulldozer catch fire in his first week on the job, that the road he was building would still be the only road north 50 years later. He knew it was the only road there was, and that it had to be finished before winter made the ground impossible to work again. The ground had known what it would ask of the people building across it. No one had needed to tell it.